Once again, we're at that time of year where everybody's really wondering why it is that some students are performing well and others just don't seem to be there yet. And earlier today, I overheard a conversation that I've heard various versions of thousands of times, and that's that we have a group of students who are not proficient and are not able to demonstrate their understanding by answering questions or summarizing or any of the other ways we have to see student thinking. And as often happens, the inference was that they don't have the fluency to do it. They're not able to access the text. And I always have a follow-up for that. Well, what is it that's keeping them from having that fluency, or why is it they're not able to, break apart and decode the meaning of these texts? And that's where usually the conversation kind of stops. And so I think we've gotten really good at deciding fluency's impact and comprehension, but I'm not sure that we all have the same idea for what fluency is. So I thought maybe I'd take just a minute to deconstruct fluency. One thing I will say is when we talk about reading comprehension, it starts with reading. When we talk about reading fluency, it starts with reading. And there is no reading without comprehension. Being able to say a word is not reading. Being able to recognize a word is not reading. That's the exact same skill we use when we're able to recognize a color and say, oh, this is kind of brown, this is black. So a good example is it's not really fluency if you could do it equally well in another language. I do not understand Spanish very well, but I'm able to read pretty much all the words because it's a very easy language to read, but that's not real fluency because there's no comprehension. So reading is all about making meaning. There's a few reasons we write things down. One is so that we can remember things. Another is so that we can process things as we write them down, and we can start to think through them. We can add on, revise, see what it is we know, and clarify what we want to know. We also write so that we can share information, share that understanding, or share that experience with others. And usually that's what we have students reading. We have them reading to learn from someone else, or we have them reading to share an experience, whether it was fictional and it's been created, or whether it really happened. With that in mind, the purpose of reading is the same as the purpose of listening to that story about that experience, or listening to someone teach you about photosynthesis. It's to make meaning. The reason I say all this is just to make sure we never try to say that fluency comes before comprehension. That's not true, even though we often hear it. It is a skill we need to be able to comprehend when we read independently. There are 3 parts to fluency. There's 2 parts that we hear about the most, and it's because they're the easiest to assess and they're the easiest to model and teach. Those are, of course, rate and accuracy. Rate is the speed at which you read. Rate implies that you have a steady speed throughout, with sometimes you slow down, sometimes you speed up. But without an appropriate rate for the level of text you're reading, you're not going to understand it. Accuracy, of course, is that you're reading the words that were written on the page, and you're reading them in the correct sequence, and you're reading them for the meaning that they were meant. If you're reading fall, you know that it means somebody fell down, or is it a season in the year. So that's rate and accuracy. I'm not going to talk a lot about those because I think we've pretty much got that down. The one thing I will say, it's not a misconception for teachers, but for students, when we talk about rate, especially when we call it speed, we're kind of conditioned to think, when we think of speed, to think faster is better. That is true for emergent readers, usually because they're so painfully slow. But rate is the rate at which you comprehend. So the more we can drive that home with students, and the more we can help them find a rate that works for them, the better off we will all be. The third piece, and it's really the most important for meaning, is prosody. I prefer not to use a lot of jargon. I absolutely hate using acronyms. And it's because sometimes when we use these words and these acronyms, we either knowingly or unknowingly cloak our own misconceptions or kind of gloss over the fact that we have a shallow understanding of something. So prosody is all about how you read the text the way it was meant to be understood. So with accuracy, we're reading the words that were written in the correct sequence, and with the explicit or inferred meaning that was used in that text. But with prosody, we're reading more subtly than that. We're looking for exactly the meaning, exactly the tone of this text. So prosody comes from a Greek root, and one of the ways to interpret that Greek root is a song as it is sung. And I think that's a powerful phrase to keep in our minds, because it doesn't just say a song, because it could just be the lyrics and maybe you could read those, but it's as it's sung to the music. I think I left that out a minute ago, but as sung to the music. And with that music comes feeling, and comes timing, and comes emphasis. You know at a certain point in the song, this is what's most important. You know from the timbre or the way, you know, the person singing's voice cracks just a little bit, what type of emotion they're trying to convey. I think a problem in the past is because, myself included, none of us really had great reading instruction when we were working in our undergraduate programs. We didn't really focus on this, and we didn't realize that it develops with rate and accuracy, not after rate and accuracy. Now, obviously, in a B or C level text, there's very little use of prosody. But you'll be surprised when you hear some of the pieces that really matter. One of the keys that we get from prosody is determining whether we're reading a statement, a command, a question, or an exclamation. This is the type of thing you can actually see in a level C book. C and a C, hey. So, you know, are they asking you the question at the end of a series of facts? Are they asking you a question to set a purpose before you read a series of facts? Was the mother questioning the child, you know, over and over about these different things, or vice versa? And if a child reads those words accurately and at a rate similar to what they speak, but without the inflection of a question or a statement, they are not comprehending that text. And it can seem like they are because the text is so well supported by pictures, it's such a familiar situation, things like that, that we may think, well, when they read it this way, they do get it. I learned something really interesting just a couple days ago, and that's on average, every student anywhere can read fluently a text 2 to 4 levels above what they can comprehend. So let's say you're, you know, I'm going to have to count up, you're reading an L, and you're passing that when you do your written comprehension, which means not that you're a good writer, but that you're able to answer questions that are on a level 2 or 3 depth of knowledge. But let's see, let's count up L, M, N, O, P. Well, I can read an L and answer those questions, but in class with my teacher, I read every word correctly, and I read it about 100 words per minute of a P. But then I answer 3 of 5 oral questions correctly, and I answer 1 of 2 written responses correctly, and we just don't know why I'm being held back. Well, this is where that prosody can really come in. Go back with them and read the book they read yesterday or the text they read yesterday, and listen not just to the rate, not just are they able to read the tricky words correctly, but how are they reading it? And you should be able to hear them teaching the reading to you. If they're reading a narrative, it should be like they're telling you a story. If they're reading an explanatory text, it should be like they're explaining to you all about how the moon and the sun and the earth interact. If not, I guarantee you they don't comprehend. Now, because this is a little bit different for every student, a great practice to do is before you have them read, sit down and just talk to them about it. This is not necessarily a cold read, so it could be something they've already learned about. You could say, all right, Jose, let's talk about the sun and the moon and the earth. What do you really remember? Well, give them a minute to think, and then when they start to tell you back, listen to their speech patterns. Where do they break? Where do they pause? Where do they stop, go back, and say something differently? Just get a sense for that right before you listen to how they read, and that gives you an idea for how to judge, can they read this level of text with meaning and for comprehension. And like I said, this is not a cold read, so they've hopefully done most of their decoding already. So then if they read the text and it sounds just like Jose sounds when he explains something to you, awesome. He understands this. He's ready to work with some more reading behaviors in this level so he can progress to more complex text. If he switches into what I call a reader's voice and he doesn't sound like Jose anymore, it's very probable you need to drop back 2 to 4 levels and find some text. It could be on the same topic or another topic, and have him work through reading and coach him on how to accent certain syllables, when to stretch a word out to show its importance, or to show that it's being used to demonstrate sarcasm or things like that. Because they may be fooling us a little bit by their ability to do what we've taught them, to decode well, to use multiple strategies, to predict words based on visual and syntactical cues, as well as the meaning they're making. But we'll very likely find when they're not able to read in a real, genuine voice and they're reading in a reader voice, that they're only getting a surface level understanding. Of course they can retell because they remember what they read, but they're going to be unlikely to be able to move on. Let me grab our favorite resource. You guys all have this. This is the one we did the training on in the summer. It's one we use every day when we plan. It's got the levels of learning. So if I want to know if someone comprehends something, I don't really just want to know if they recall, because you can recall without deep comprehension. I can recall exactly what you told me in Spanish, for instance, without really understanding what happened. I just can say things back really well. But can I summarize? Can I paraphrase? That's a key. And if you want to have some good strategies for how to teach students to paraphrase, not by just asking them to or telling them to, but how to help them deconstruct what mental processes happen when we paraphrase. Can they clarify? Can they reorganize those thoughts? That's why when we have students read, we have them chart their thoughts in graphical organizers. Can they do some of those really important thinking skills we talk about? Compare and contrast, determine patterns, analyze relationships, evaluate. If they're reading with prosody, which remember we're basically saying is reading with meaning, reading the way you would explain it to someone or you would convey a story, then they should be able to do this type of thinking after they've read and taken some notes. If they're able to perfectly read the text and then they get stuck down in this level where they're answering these basic questions, they're able to identify important information, they're able to define words from the text, they're able to recall what was taught, or what order the events happened, things like that, but they're not able to go beyond, it's very likely that they're not really reading for that meaning. And like we said before, reading fluency and reading comprehension both start with reading for a reason, and that's because reading is all about taking in information to make meaning for ourselves. I hope this is at least a little bit helpful to get us started talking about what it means when we say fluency is keeping our students from comprehending. Because if they truly have fluency, they are comprehending. They're not two separate things. So let's get together and let's work on some of this.